Now, just before coming on, I had the chance to briefly chat with Patrick, who you've just seen, and we both breathed a big sigh of relief that actually we were pretty well aligned in our thinking, which is always good to hear when somebody's going on before and somebody's coming on after you. So, yes, very much here to talk about AI and the impact that it's having in the industry at the moment, and how we look at that from a paid marketeer perspective, and how we evolve and how we develop with it. Immediately, I'd like to talk about this idea of a mindset shift. So last year, with an awful lot of our clients, we were having the same type of conversation over and over again, where we were saying actually it's far less about the technical kind of side of actually what we're doing, and more about this idea of anticipating what's coming. And the mindset shift away from what we manually do and what we manually manage was a real change in the way that we explain to clients, okay, here's how we'll use your time, here's how we'll create campaigns for you, and this is what we do moving forwards. So it felt like a very important thing to kind of highlight that kind of change in mentality from saying, okay, this is now about what are we seeing, what do we not need to do so much anymore, and actually where are we going, how do we best prepare for that. This led me on to then thinking, actually, this feels very much in the region of psychology and how we think as marketeers, which brought me onto the idea of understanding the mind and behavior and how we look at things. I'm particularly interested in psychology and how minds work, because ultimately everybody in this room today is a byproduct of all of your different experiences. So how we think, how we feel, how we act, it's all been a byproduct of everything that we've experienced leading up to this point. And everybody having different backgrounds, naturally we all think, act and feel in completely different ways. And that's almost where I had this idea of, okay, well, let's compare that, and how does that work in a digital space? As a mother of two, I have two small children, a 5-year-old, a 2-year-old, and we bring them up in the same environment. They have the same things. We like to treat them fairly equally, but they are their own people and they are very different. And that led me on to thinking about the idea of genetics and how things are made in certain ways, and that's how they're looking to kind of progress themselves over time. And it seemed very much in line with how we look at AI, and I'll go on to that further the more we go into this presentation here. I mean, AI, it's everywhere. There's been numerous blog posts, news pieces, discussions internally around what is AI, how do we define it, and actually how people define it is actually really different. But in the sense of this presentation today, I mean, I've broken it down into 3 kind of broad categories. So the first being narrow intelligence, the next being general, and then super intelligence. To go through the kind of the definitions as I see them for these different categories. So narrow intelligence is very much in that it is goal orientated, it has a task, it's set to do a certain thing. And we'll come on to it more later, and that is much like the way of genetics, in that there's a certain build-up of like, this is how it's being programmed. General intelligence, this is almost what I see as the next layer of AI, and how we look at it and say, actually, this is starting to mimic human behavior. It's starting to have an idea of what we do as humans in a greater sense. And then certainly moving on to super intelligence, and this is almost when you talk to people about AI and it's about the machines taking over, this is where we have this kind of fantastical view of what you tend to see in the cinema and different films, so I, Robot, or as I'll be coming on to, I mean, WALL-E, a particular favourite anyway, but certainly super intelligence is that it now has human capable levels of thinking, and it surpasses that idea of it's built in a certain way to do a certain thing. One of the reasons I looked at, okay, how do we look at AI and how do we look at the categories that it's broken down to, is purely down to trying to calm down what was quite a lot of overthinking about what AI can do and the impact it then has on us and what we do within our roles. Because for me, we're very much in that narrow intelligence phase, certainly within the digital space, where we're using it within all different platforms, and different platforms are just, that's the innate way that they're built. So, you know, for me right now, artificial narrow intelligence is absolutely where we're at. And who knows, we're very much progressing quite quickly. It will be at a quicker pace into getting to that next step where there is much more mimicking of sentiment and human level impact that for me, it doesn't necessarily have yet. To break down the nature versus nurture element of it. So for me, actually, it's less about that idea of versus and actually against, and more about how they work with one another. Because much like bringing up children, or as you would have heard about nature versus nurture in the world of child development, it's not one or the other. Everybody is a product of both, and or certainly in the essence that we're talking about here. So for me, AI sits within the nature side of this. It has these characteristics to it. It's got genetics. It's built in a certain way to do a certain thing. So that could be a bidding model. That could be you asking it to say, hey, you know, can you give me some ad copy that's a certain length or about a certain thing? And in that way, it's fixed. It has certain data points to reference to. It's got a pool of what it's referring and saying, actually, this is what I'm looking at to be able to tell you this is what you should do, or this is how you could write that, or here's a different spin that you might not have thought of. All of it will be based on information that it's been given. Whereas the nurture side of it, and this is certainly where ourselves as digital marketeers comes in and actually has a real role to play still. And as much as that has changed over time, this nurture element for me is certainly not going away, and we'll go into some more detail on that as well. As I said before, you know, nurturing, you know, it's driven by our environment, what we're around, societal influence. We've learned to be a certain way just purely from the environments that we've been in. And actually, an example of that from a digital marketing perspective, one of our clients is Médecins Sans Frontières, who deal with frontline disasters and emergencies. And as much as you can have programs and you can have data flows and you can say, right, if this, then that, what we could do from a nurturing side is say, actually, if there's an emergency, we'll have campaigns up in hours, and we will have it going through to a certain page with the right message to be able to get the right support coming through for that particular time. An example of that was the Turkey-Syria earthquake, where actually within 4 hours we had everything up and running, and we were starting to get those vital donations through to help support people that had been affected by that. I want to go right back to the start of my digital marketing career, where for me, this felt really important to include, because right back in 2007, there was this real frenzy and kind of uproar about the introduction of, first in March, pay per action. It was a beta test, and we were like, well, we can tell it we only want to pay so much now for conversions. Before that, you couldn't control it necessarily in that sense. You were doing it very manually in the way of saying, increase this CPC by 5p, or exporting data and, you know, manipulating it, re-uploading it. And then very shortly after that, only 6 months in fact, we then have a new CPA bidding model coming in. And this at the time was, you know, very much like the experience with AI now, where it had an awful lot of kind of frenzy around it to say, oh, what's this going to do? Because now if clients can say they only want to pay so much, what role is there for me? But we've stood the test of time. These things have developed. There is now God knows how many different bidding models that you can use, and different ways you can use the platforms and take advantage of these different kinds of features. You'll all be familiar with these, our tools of the trade, and how we use them. And within all of these tools, there's opportunities to take the AI-led side of things and actually have that nurturing human-led side of things as well. For example, with creative, and I know Patrick mentioned about creative earlier as well. With creative, we can say, okay, let's use different AI to kind of test and say, can you give me a headline for this, or body copy for that, or, you know, what makes a good creative? And contrast that, we've also got responsive search ads, we've got ACAs, we've got automatically created ads or assets, and, you know, there's an awful lot there to say, okay, let's find a balance between these different nature and nurture side of things to make it work to the best of our ability. we step away now a little bit. You may or may not have heard of somebody called Garry Kasparov, but he was the world's youngest chess champion back in 1985. Good year I was born. But he actually then held on to that title held on to a title of the top-rated player for 20 years. He dominated his field and his industry. And the reason I put this example up here is because AI is having this impact on all different sides or in all different industries, and particularly in sport and different arenas. This was when we were saying, okay, let's have a simulation of playing chess against a machine. So Deep Blue here, being the machine that he ended up playing against, to see whether it could challenge his human level of ability to outsmart that, or actually with infinite possibilities, our machine's just going to be better regardless. And actually, Kasparov then went on to be very interested in that, in the sense that he really got into the world of AI and how that works, and continued in that time to say, you know, what impact is this having on different things? And certainly his overall take from it, and certainly one that I take away as well, is that we've got far more to win than to lose with working with AI, machine learning, whatever you'd like to call it. And certainly if there are things that we're no longer doing, then that's just giving us more time to do the things that I'm sure all of you would be desperate to do if you had more time, because time is precious. And just so everybody knows, he won against Deep Blue in I think it was 95, and then in 97 he went on and then lost. So, you know, there's still an awful lot there to explore in the way that it affects all different types of spaces and how we work with it. So Kasparov said, you know, it buys you the thing that you need the most. You need time. And actually, if we're spending less time on the manual elements that we now don't need to do because these programs are doing it for us, it gives us the best thing that we need. So really, this next part of the presentation is more of a reflection on, we've got time, how do we use it for now? It's a really rapidly changing environment. Things are developing all the time. You know, there'll be a new feature come out or a new change, and you think, oh, okay, now what does that mean for me? So what I'm going to go through now in the last part of my presentation is just some various ways that you can take away today to say, okay, here's a good reflection point. Are we doing these things internally? Can they have a positive impact if we start to kind of reflect on that and review what we're doing? So for me, it's about striking the balance between that nature and nurture side of things, between AI and what we do as digital marketers and the experiences that we have. Get creative is absolutely the #1 point, because for me, technology cannot replace creativity. You can give it a certain number of prompts to say, okay, you know, can you do this for me? Can you do that for me? But actually finding a way to add that human level of creativity is certainly really important, because tone of voice, matching a brand and what they need to have out there, but also having it not scraped from, you know, the same content and the same websites. It's so important to be able to give a spin on it that actually aligns really well with the values and the message that you're trying to put out there. The next for me is really important, because data is everything. AI is data. That's where it's getting its information from, and that's how it's learning and how it's building up an idea of what we're asking it for. Knowing your data points is the most valuable thing for me that you can do, whether you're B2B or B2C, because as kind of as harsh as it sounds, everything has a value. And finding that value and being able to train these systems to optimize towards those values is absolutely, for me, my recommendation and what everybody should be doing. So whether that's you're looking for a lead and then working back from saying, okay, we close a certain number of opportunities, but take a step back from that. How many sales qualified leads were there? Take a next step back. How many marketing qualified leads were there? And then take that next step back and work out your conversion rates for each step of the journey. Work out that final value. Work it back down to the most valuable point to then train the systems to optimize towards. One of the most important things for me is then how you talk to clients about that, and how you almost challenge the assumptions around what we're looking to do and what we're looking to target. And this has led to, you know, many conversation actually around, but we can't have a CPA of that. If I took that to the board, they, you know, they would absolutely trash it. And that's where a certain element, again, of nurturing and giving that reassurance that actually a number that you put in these platforms doesn't need to match what you need to go back to a board with, because what it needs to match is what we're training it to do. And that gives a really different idea of being able to say, okay, well, I'm going to then put a CPA in of this, or what a value or a return on ad spend of X, just to be able to say we need that, because we know that from our data it's going to work back and figure out then who the right people to go to. Value, absolutely everything. Patience. And I'm sure this is actually quite again, a difficult conversation. A lot of these are kind of difficult conversations to be had, because machine learning, AI, it needs time. It will get quicker, and obviously the more data you have, the better, absolutely. But by having patience and being able to say to clients, right, we've set up this campaign, we are taking a step back, we are leaving it to do its thing. It's really uncomfortable, because there'll always be that kind of 7 to 14-day period where things are a bit squiffy and you're refreshing and you're checking, is it doing what I need it to do? And actually, sometimes it's not. But I would say, always try and give clients that reassurance around, we're not touching it. Everybody kind of wants to pick at a spot. And, I would say, if you can, avoid it. Predictive analytics, so crucial, because as I said about earlier on, in the way of that this is less about where we've come from and more about where we're going. If you're got the amount of data in GA4 to be able to use predictive analytics, I would absolutely recommend it, because it gives you far better view of saying, okay, I'm going to make this move now because we see it's done this, and it's far less in the way of having to analyze what's been before and trusting the system with that data set to guide you. If there's one thing that I've learned specifically over my career, is that customer profiles are so crucial, and how we view customers, and really mapping those out and having those in detail, because that's what's going to be able to impact the creative side of things. It's going to be able to impact how we structure what we do, knowing those data points. One customer is worth X, another customer is worth Y, and being able to really go down into the detail in that. I would highly recommend, if it's not something you've done recently, reset, review, see who you're targeting and why, and how are you catering for that within the messaging. The main message for me to take away is actually, AI, I think, has such a purpose, and it's a really great tool, and it's going to give us an awful lot more in the way of time to be able to do the elements that we wouldn't have naturally had time to do before. But absolutely, it's still going to be that balancing act of finding the right level between nature and nurture, to say, okay, I'm going to use it for this, I'm not going to use it from that, because actually it doesn't need to do everything. And I'm going to leave you with one example from another client. We're very fortunate to work with the Natural History Museum in London, and I'm just going to give you an example of why there is still that need to have that kind of human level of engagement and interaction with campaigns, despite how automated they can be to set up and run. They running an exhibition for the colossal Titanosaur. We gave it a suite of assets and we thought, this is great, let's review it, let's see how it's going. There's absolutely no way we could leave them with an ad that says meet the colossal tit. So it's just that end message of, we're not going extinct yet. This is just very much about how we evolve and how we develop as marketeers. So hopefully that gives you some really great reflection points to go back on and challenge those assumptions and have those difficult conversations with clients around what the balance is and why your role is still so vital and so important in running these campaigns. I'm Sophie, I'm a group advertising strategist from Crafted, and it's been a pleasure being here today. Thank you.